later, and I think there's probably another 10 or 15 people coming, so it might be a bit noisy as we're going. Feel free to grab coffee or refreshments as we're going. I'm not distracted very easily, but we'll try to do a break towards the middle. We have a fair amount of content to go over today, but I'm going to try to whip through it very quickly, and then if we want, maybe come back and go into more detailed discussions about stuff, just so that we get a chance to cover all the content. Having said that, I think if you have other issues you want to bring up or discuss, we've allotted a little bit of time, but maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and if it starts to go a little too long, again, we'll cut it off and maybe reconvene at the end and see if we can follow up on those issues. Okay. Now, most of the issues that we're dealing with are issues either from tax cases or new pronouncements, or in many cases, issues that practitioners like yourself have brought to my attention. So I don't know why, but people tend to email me whenever there's a problem. Hey, Dave, CRA's doing this, or what do you think, or is this a common issue? And once in a while I say, wow, that's something I was unaware of, and a great issue for practitioners in general. So a number of the issues that we're going to talk about today are ones that I've got from members of the group here or abroad, and other ones that I've just run into myself. All right. So what I'll try to do is go through a time frame of just what's happened in mostly 2011. And by 2011, I mean since last October, our last meeting, 2010 to today, things that we haven't covered. And what I try to do, just so I keep them fresh in my mind, is, every quarter or so, I'll do a newsletter or what I think the most important things are, just to track that. So those are the handouts that you have, 3 different handouts, dealing with basically issues for that section, 4 months at a time. The very first newsletter, I'll talk about 2 cases that came out, Tax Court of Canada cases. None are really that overwhelming, but they're interesting, I think, in some respects. So the first of it is a company called Spectrol Inc. And what happened with Spectrol Inc. is there's a very much like the time frame to file the SR&ED claims. There's also specific time frames to file objections or appeals. And as many of you know, usually you get a notice of assessment you don't agree with. You have 90 days to file on time your objection in your T400 form. What happened in this company's case is there's actually another caveat under the Act that says if you miss that and you have a good reason, the Act will allow you to extend that for up to a year. You can get an extension of 1 year for this. And in a nutshell, the client didn't file an objection where you basically disagree with the Canada Revenue Agency and you file an objection with the Canada Revenue Agency. They went to the next level. They made a mistake and filed an appeal to the Tax Court of Canada, which is generally the next level. And the proper process is you disagree with the CRA, you file an objection with the CRA. You either wait for the CRA to say, hey, it went back to the guy who disagreed with you in the first place, so he's not going to change his mind, and he's going to say, hey, we're not changing our mind. That takes a year or 2. But what you have to do is you have to file the objection, and you can wait 90 days. You know the CRA is generally not going to change its mind on an objection, or I've found that, because it's always going back to the same people who didn't agree with you in the first place, and you already had your chance to convince them. When I'm filing an objection, I'm not hoping any response from the CRA. I'm waiting my 90 days, and I'm filing to the Tax Court of Canada, because at that point, now I know I get to deal with a litigator. I get to deal with someone at the Crown, who's a lawyer, who's going to talk Income Tax Act. And then once we can talk the Income Tax Act, I don't care about ITs or ICs or whatever they say. We'll follow law. Hopefully I can convince them we've got a good legal argument here, and we're going to settle. It's going to be done very quickly. This client made a mistake. I guess they had bad advisors, or they tried it themselves. They didn't realize that before you file to the Tax Court of Canada, you have to file the objection first. What happened here is they missed the filing for the objection, but they said, well, we filed this appeal to the Tax Court of Canada, and we think we sent a copy to the CRA. Couldn't prove it. And the judge said, well, you guys didn't know what you were doing, but you filed all the facts and the issues that you would have filed with the CRA with the Department of Justice instead, so you sent it to the wrong agency, but you still filed the stuff on time, so we're going to let it go. Right? So I'm saying, well, usually you want to file the right forms with the right agencies, but it just shows me that the tax courts are really willing to be lenient with a guy who didn't file the right forms on time, arguably filed the right information, albeit with the wrong agency, and the courts were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in this case, and said that since they filed with the tax court, it was probably likely they filed with the CRA as well, and the CRA just lost it because it wasn't addressed to them. Deemed filed on time. So again, what can we take away from that? I don't know if there's any long-term implications, other than the courts seem to be very lenient with the little guys, and it's important to know the proper steps on the objection appeal process. We talked about that a little earlier. But the key ones I would talk about are really you get a 30-day letter, as we call it, where you can negotiate. That's where you should put all your effort in my opinion. If that doesn't work, there's something called a second administrative review that some districts still honor. I don't think Hamilton does. Certain districts will, and others, it's really up to a district or region by region whether they want to do these or not. I've worked with those. Those work pretty good. The next level then is to file your objection. I would say wait your 90 days and then go to Tax Court of Canada. As anyone, this is an issue I want to talk about later, one of the big issues that practitioners brought up is that if I go to the Tax Court of Canada, I can hum along the first couple parts. You know, there's about 9 procedures. And the 6th one is something called discovery. So I start thinking I'm going really fast. I'm going to be at tax court all the time until I hit the step 6 called discovery. And that can take 2 to 3 years where nothing happens. You just stop. And one of the big complaints that I've heard from a number of practitioners is what the CRA will do is say, well, oh, you got current claims with the same issue. Well, we can't rule on that. You've already taken it to court. We're going to have to wait till the judge decides till we can give you any shred money for the next couple of years. So it's really not in my client's interest to go to court in many cases and hold up 3 years of claims on an issue that's not absolutely of paramount importance to them. So they tend to just agree on this and agree on that and make concessions. Does anyone have any other avenues that you can do or know any shortcuts to speed that process? Yes?
On the Spectrol case, David, they didn't receive a notice of assessment or reassessment for about 6 years after filing.
This is true. So they filed the objection, but they filed the appeal. They were supposed to, there's a whole bunch more facts. I didn't get into it. They received a notice of assessment, and instead of filing the proper objection, basically, they filed with the tax court an appeal, and the judge said, well, in substance, it's kind of the same thing. We'll let it go. Now, on getting back to with a specific to Spectrol, I'm not sure that it's that relevant to the whole group, other than, what if I want to go to Tax Court of Canada? Do I have to go formal appeal? Does anyone know of any alternatives? Method that I use is, I have the right under the Act to, if I want to limit to $12,000 per taxation year, I can do something called an informal appeal. I don't even have to hire a lawyer. An accountant can do it. I can file it myself. And I generally get my ruling within a year then on an informal appeal. Now, my client, if I have $100,000 at risk, I have to limit it to 12 for that year. But the reality is, I'll explain, do you want to lose $90,000 but get a precedent that next year the judge already ruled, we won, you got to give us our money for the next 3 years, or do you want to hold your claims up for 3 years till we go through the superior courts, and you might even lose there, and you're out $1 million. And usually it's a no-brainer for the client, right? But yeah, exactly, Pat. So what you're talking about is before we get into the assessment stage, right? Absolutely. I would agree. Negotiate all you can before you get an assessment. 30-day letters, that's the time to provide any information. But if you can't, if they're just not listening, you can't get to an agreement, your rights are then objection, then appeal, right? Not appeal, then objection, as the client mistook there. So I'm not sure that there's a lot to really focus on other than obviously file the objection before the appeal. Don't make this mistake. But at the same time, if you're a little client, tax courts may be lenient with the small and medium guys on SR&ED. Santori is another kind of weird one, but it's interesting in my view just to talk about for a number of reasons. I'm not really sure what this guy was thinking, but he had a company, and he would say that he's paying himself wages each year for 4 years in a row, and then he would take it all as a note payable to himself. And then he'd say, well, it's actually a bad debt because my company can't afford to pay me. So he'd claim the credits on the wages that were never actually paid. And then he'd claim an A bill on the other side saying, well, it's a business loss 4 years in a row. And I won't even get into specifics, but this is all wrong, what he's doing. Okay. Number one, he should have issued a T4. Obviously, the CRA denied the A bill, and they weren't sure like if it's really wages because he didn't issue the T4 or whatever, or if it's an A bill. They actually let him claim the wages, believe it or not, but they denied the A bill. So he had to pay personal tax on it, and then he got his SR&ED credits. Realistically, and where I thought this, I mean, other than it's kind of funny, the lesson in here is that there is a method in the SR&ED process to claim wages that are incurred but not paid, unpaid wages. And I find a lot of practitioners miss this. So what happens is a scenario where you come to work for me, you're a bright software developer, I started a new company, and I can't afford to pay you what you're worth. I say, look, you're worth 10 grand a month, but I can only give you 2 cash, and I'm going to owe you the other 8. And believe me, when this product takes off, I'm going to pay you your money and interest, and this happens all the time. Oh, okay, let's try to work together and build something, and then pay me when the money comes in. Now, what happens is, the proper way, assuming you were doing SR&ED the whole time, for 12 months, is that I paid you $24,000, which I should get my shred credits on right now, but I owe you another $96,000. Right? I owe you that ultimately I'm going to have to pay for this SR&ED work that you did. And if I ever want to get paid on that, I have to claim the work in the current year. So I have to describe in a project what you did worth the whole 120, not just what I paid you plus what I owe you. The CRA has the right to come in and review whether that 120,000 is all reasonable or whatever, and deny any portions that they don't agree to. But once I've done that, does anyone know how I disclose that other $96,000? Well, that's a follow-up, but I'm saying for SR&ED purposes. Yeah, it's a 78 sub 4 deduction. Anything you don't pay within 180 days, you don't get to deduct.
But you also don't get a deduction if it's not paid within 180 days.
That's correct.
As wages either.
That's right. Now, for the SR&ED, getting back, there's a line. If you read the form, wages, specified wages, non-specified, and then you'll see line 315. A lot of people don't know what it is. And it's a number that goes there, but it doesn't actually form part of the pool. It just carries forward. It says, wages incurred in the year but not paid within 180 days. And I use this as an anti-avoidance provision, but I use it as a planning tool. Hey, you just left your job in industry where you're making $200,000 a year and you started your own company and you're paying yourself $1,000 a month and you're working night and day harder than you ever did. Chances are you're still worth $200,000 a year. In fact, you're probably worth 5 times yearly maximum pensionable earnings, which is the most you're going to get. You're worth $232,000 a year, let's say. So let's say I paid you $24,000 and I owe you another $212,000 to bring it up to the maximum. I have to put this $212,000 that I owe you on line 315 with my T661 form. CRA has a right to review not only wages I paid you, but the other $200,000 that I say I'm going to pay you or myself for the SR&ED, and that the SR&ED was valid and they agree to it. If at any future year I can show that I'm paying you the back wages, which is basically I made my remittance, the T4 remittances that I owed you. There's another line that says amounts previously denied under 78 sub 4 in another year, paid in the year, and I get my credits on it in the current year. The only corollary is it loses its inherent nature of wages and just becomes a qualified expense, so I don't get proxy on it. If I've done the proxy, I lose my proxy. I just get the wages back in. But my point being that that's actually an anti-avoidance provision which can turn around, and a lot of clients who can't afford to pay themselves what they're worth can still accrue what they're worth, and ultimately, if the product becomes successful in the future year, and I say, here's the $600,000 for the prior years, I can't claim $600,000 in a year as a specified employee. I have a maximum of roughly $230,000 a year, but if I've accrued it, I can start paying all the back wages and get all my credits.
The downside to that is, of course, you've got to show it on your statement.
Well, this is a fantastic point. So one of the point here is, yeah, but I'm messing up my current ratios and my whole balance sheet and everything. And I've had a client in that situation, and here's what we did. We went to the bank and said, the bank said, oh, you violated your covenants. And we said, well, what if we put a covenant in here that says the amount owed to this guy will never, ever be paid until we have your permission? He said, oh, well, that's totally fine then. If we know, and it's primarily for tax purposes. The bank loves that. If we can help you do something that doesn't cost us anything and helps you for tax, yeah, we'll help you on that. But you have to actually inform the bank of what you're doing. You have to agree that you're not going to pay any money out, so it's not going to affect their security. And they're generally pretty happy with it. But I would agree, you have to communicate with a large number of people, particularly if they're financed, to get that through. Yes?
Does that qualify for specified wages?
Absolutely. Any wages. If it's specified, I'm not sure if it affects the cap at that point. So specified employee would be 5 times YMPE is the max you can claim in a year, right? Roughly $230,000, $240,000. It goes up each year. All right. Okay, so I mean, like I say, this one's kind of funny, but I think it illustrates a neat scenario that a lot of people miss, which is guys starting out a company where they don't have a lot of money, they're living off their life savings. There's a big opportunity to accrue reasonable wages for them. And ultimately, years down the road, when the company starts making money, to pay the back wages and get at least part of the SR&ED credits that they could have had. Okay. Okay. Getting into some new stuff. CRA Pronouncements. One of the papers that kind of unnerves me that came out is one called SR&ED Filing Requirements, the policy draft. And it's not something that really has anything new. I knew this was coming, but I was just hoping it was coming later. So what it talks about is what is the interpretation of the CRA under the filing requirements of the Act? If you read the Act, it says you have to file all prescribed information in prescribed form. All right, so that's pretty clear. All prescribed information in prescribed form. Question 1, what's prescribed form? Well, CRA says prescribed form is Schedules 32 and 31. Okay? So if you just file a 661 but not the Schedule 31, you haven't filed all prescribed information in prescribed form, you lose the entire claim. So, well, that's pretty mean, but it doesn't probably happen too much. And then they're saying, well, prescribed form in certain circumstances could include other prescribed forms. Like if I do a non-arm's length transfer, I might have prescribed form 1145, 1146. If I have a specified employee in more than one associated company who's getting SR&ED wages, then I have another form, 1174, to make sure I don't go over 5 times YMPE on the aggregate. And arguably, if I don't file anyone, and so Schedule 31, 32, none of us are probably going to miss that. We're going to get that. But might you forget 1174 when the specified employees has wages from multiple companies under his control or her control? That's an easy one. So I'm saying there's a lot of pitfalls in here when it says all prescribed information in prescribed form. I remember Bill McCarroll did a speech with us maybe about 6 years ago when this first came out, all prescribed information, prescribed form. This was back when we were paper filing. And question came up, okay, Bill, what if we're at the 18-month deadline, we're doing a big claim for a client, they got 38 contractors, we put them all in there, and we missed the HST or GST number for one of them. And it was $180, and we didn't bother to chase it. What happened? Did we lose the $180? Do we lose the whole project the contractor's on? What? He smiled. He said, oh, no, Dave, it's much more serious than that. You haven't provided all prescribed information in prescribed form. You lose everything. At which point the room about the size erupted. People are on the phone. Oh, my God, do we have our insurance? What's going on? And it's no joke. CRA hates 18-month claims, is the way I'd say it. I'll tell my client, look, CRA's put this as that our parliaments put this as an incentive process to get you to invest in SR&ED consciously. Not for guys like me to come along and say, hey, guess what? I can go back 2 years and get you a whole bunch of money that you never thought you could get on the back of the Canadian taxpayer. Which is exactly how the politicians think if you're going back 2 years. You didn't intend to claim. You didn't have a system in place. A smart guy like me came along, and now we're trying to make a tax grab on the back of the Canadian taxpayer. And they're saying, CRA says, hey, the law says 18 months. The law's a law. We have to, if you do it properly, no problems. But just miss one thing. Hey, the law is the law. It says you have to file out prescribed information in prescribed form. You can take a very strict interpretation of that law if you want. And I'm saying that I'm leery of this. I've always been very leery of this in paper filing. When we switched to e-file, there was an administrative provision in the CRA that says, hey, as long as you fill out something in each of the project description boxes and you select traditional or proxy overhead, anything else could be missing and we're going to give you a second chance. That was for like first year and a half because people were freaked out about e-file. Now, e-file seems to be accepted and they just released this draft paper saying, well, now we're putting it back to the way it was. File at the 18 months and miss anything, miss one box, you lost the entire claim. And I see this all the time because I get the unfortunate opportunity to get hired to quantify the damages against a client by another professional like ourselves for situations like this. And it's really easy. Here's exactly how much you cost the client, and here's how I recommend you talk to insurance about settlement. And you're probably going to lose for negligence every time. All right, so I guess my real issue is how tight are they going to apply this? And as a practitioner, is anyone aware of methods that you can use to protect yourself? Does the CRA have any quoted guidelines that if you submit by a certain deadline, they're going to give you a second chance? I heard it. 15 months, right. CRA says if you don't wait right to the 18-month deadline, you give us 3 months or 90 days to review it and something's missing. Even if we're past 18 months, but we took a while to get back to you, you gave us enough time to get it, we're going to give you a second chance. In my office, everything's an absolute 15-month deadline. If a client wants to file after 15 months, my engagement is clear. Hey, I'm taking absolutely no responsibility for this. If you lose it, tough luck, I don't care. I don't want to file beyond 15 months. I think when you see these things go into play, they're going to be more relevant again, and clients and preparers, practitioners who don't consider that could have some pretty serious lawsuits against them. Anything else on that one? All right. Third-party payments. I've just pulled sections of this that I thought were interesting or opportunistic. One of the key things, and I don't think there's anything new, but maybe something that when we turn the cameras off, CRA can comment on it, is they're very clear, and I think it's always been this way, but they're tightening it up. For both contractors, subcontractors, and payments to universities, the contract should be very clear that it's for SR&ED, or if it's SR&ED and something else, very clear what part is the SR&ED and what part's not the SR&ED. And this paper goes on to say that if it's mixed work and it's not clear how to segregate it, none of it's eligible for SR&ED. Okay? If you can't tell us what the SR&ED is, we'll make it easy. None of it's SR&ED. So they've kind of taken a little draconian measure there, but I could see that coming. And that would be advisable in subcontractors as well. When they read the contract, if it's a contract for goods and services, it's often hard to claim there's SR&ED. If it's specific about what the experimental components are, things like that, it makes the whole process a lot easier. The other big thing that I saw on third-party payments that was interesting to me is it talks a little bit more, gives some guidance on donations in kind, payments in kind, not a donation. So I can either get a donation to a university, get my deduction, fill out my Schedule 2, or, better yet, I could do a payment in kind for them to do research on my behalf, and I'm going to be much more tax advantaged than if I gave a donation. I'm going to get the deduction, and I'm going to get all the SR&ED credits on it on the flip side. So I'm going to get about 60, 70% of that back, depending if I'm in Ontario or Quebec, and what kind of taxpayer I am. So it's saying here that the donation in kind is good. You have to value the property. I've seen clients who had like old chemicals inventory they couldn't get rid of. And they said, oh, we'll use it as a payment in kind to the university for research, and we'll value it at retail value. And CRA accepted that. I don't know. Is that fair or not? It just says you have to be able to establish the value of it. Fair market value is what it's worth. Fair market value is kind of a gray area when you're in things. It should be unconditional. And one other thing that really grabbed me is it talks about the cost of a building. So I always tell people, unless you're Bell Northern Research and you spend $1 billion to build a clean room, which as far as I'm concerned, there's only one prescribed special purpose building in all of Canada. You can look in the Act and you have to have a clean room with maximum amount of dust particles, microns per cubic meter. Long story short, a building like that costs a minimum $1 billion and you need pre-approval. Probably none of your clients have one, or if you did, you'd know about it. Here it's saying, in general, claimant cannot claim the cost for a building for SR&ED unless it's a prescribed special purpose building. And we know there's only one of those so far approved in all of Canada. However, this is what opened my eyes, there are exceptions where third-party payments to certain recipient entities may be used to acquire a building or leasehold interest, to pay an amount in respect of or rental expense, as long as the building is committed solely to SR&ED in Canada. I'm like, so if I buy a building, I can't claim it. If I buy a building and give it to a university and do all the same stuff, I can get a full credit on that. This is what I'm reading in here. Like I said, I don't know really what to think about that, but it sounds like a really interesting loophole. I'd like to learn more. It's a draft paper, but saying, wow, I got to find out more about this because I think there could be a lot of money here. Okay. My other big comment on the third-party payments, and I've actually made this comment to Ottawa, is that with harmonization, I'm finding it very confusing. There's a list of what they call third-party approved entities, CRA, which are your universities, a couple hospitals. And then I have clients at Mount Sinai Hospital. If I look at the Ontario OBRI, Mount Sinai Hospital has two entities that are both approved for the Business Research Institute credit. Any payments you make to them are deemed university payments. You would assume that since they're already approved at the provincial level, they would be approved at the federal level too, right? No, they're not. So the criteria for applying is pretty much identical, and yet if you look, there's all kinds of entities that are approved at the provincial level and not at the federal level. So how do you handle that? I asked Ottawa, and they said, well, we're harmonizing. There shouldn't be any differences soon. So I think there's going to have to be some major changes, because right now, it's very discontinuous. Do I claim a guy as a third party? I don't know. Hey, the province says he is, but the feds say he's not. What do I do? Do I let him apply? I'm not even sure what to do in those situations. Okay? But I think the key thing is, if it's harmonized, it should be the same. If it's approved for Ontario, it should be approved federal and vice versa. It shouldn't be discontinuous that you're a third-party entity for Ontario SR&ED purposes, but not federal. I don't understand that, especially when the criteria are identical. All right. Average processing times. So this is something that most of us have gone to the CRA January seminar and looked at the processing times. Not much notable other than that they seem to be quite a bit, average 68 days for refundable claims versus the 120. I think that's kind of realistic. The one thing I would say is that, all numbers can hide the tail here. And often the reality, and I saw this more on the Ontario OITC than I do on the federal credits, but what would happen is Ontario in particular would make favorable statistics by any refund under $10,000 was instantly assessed, long before we got any federal assessment. So heaven forbid there was any adjustments on the federal side, Ontario would come and ask your client for money back. And you can't give a little client $10,000 and then say we want $5 back, because they don't have it. They're always going to spend it. It always creates huge problems. So what Ontario would do is they'd say average refund time's only 80 days, which was probably the truth. What they don't tell you is anyone under 10 grand gets it in 5 days, and anyone over 100, like $200,000, is usually waiting 6 months. So the average processing time sounds pretty reasonable, but on a dollar basis, they really skewed it. I haven't seen the same thing with the CRA, but I'm saying the average turnaround time is really that. It's a generalization. You'd assume from that everyone gets a very quick turnaround time, but I would propose that smaller claims skew this average as well. They're assessed very quickly. If I do small claims for farms or whatever, they're all part of these numbers. They're assessed as filed. Boom. The guy's got his money within a week. If I got a claim for $1 million that gets held up, that may go 6, 8, 10 months, and that's all being balanced out by all these little guys that come in. So I'm not sure if general numbers tell the whole story. I would be interested to find out some of the more details. What's the quickest turnaround time? How does it relate to the size of the claimant? Is there any correlation on that avenue? And that would tell us a little bit of a bigger story there. Anything else on turnaround times? The next issue is a really interesting one. So CRA talks about potential penalties for frivolous claims. This created a lot of buzz that if you're involved in a frivolous claim, and I think this was largely sparked by a bunch of Globe and Mail articles that gave reason to take note of this. What would happen is, I guess there were certain firms that were profiled in the Globe and Mail that were basically going up and down every street and filing a shred claim for every business on the street. Hey, you run a 7-Eleven? We'll file a shred claim. Got a gas station? We'll file a shred claim. Got a line cutting business? These people they didn't know what shred was, and they definitely weren't qualified or doing shred. But the avenue was, hey, CRA doesn't have the resources to review all of them, so some are going to fall through. And this worked very effectively. A lot of these guys were filing nonsense claims, and it might sneak through once or twice, and these guys were making their percentage commission, and everything was good. CRA was becoming so alarmed because they started to identify all these and say, we want to come out for review. Oh, you want to review it? We'll just withdraw the claim. And this is what was happening every time they would ask to review. And they were wasting a tremendous amount of resources on claims that had no possible chance of being SR&ED, not even remotely close. So they started to get a little upset and said, you know what? The Act says if you file a bogus SR&ED claim, you've actually committed fraud. It's a criminal felony. So on page 9 of the newsletter, it talks about Section 163 of the Act, says we can charge you criminally for a false misrepresentation on an SR&ED claim. Not only you, we can charge any advisors who are complicit or advised you to do such a thing. Yes?
My question on that is, as a preparer, I'm not signing anything, so how can I be held legally responsible? You know, I'm given information.
Right. So what happened is this company, I won't mention their name, went up and down the street and said, well, Peter, don't worry about it. We're the experts. We'll file a claim for you. You got no risk. If they say, I guarantee there's no risk to you, Peter. If they deny it, we'll just pull out the claim. If they want to come talk to you, we're just going to say we'll deny the whole, we'll just retract it.
So if I say to my client, remember that if you say something, if you did something you didn't.
If you coax a client who would have just been going about their business.
In my contract, does
right.
that cover me?
No. If you go around and knowingly and willingly convince people who aren't doing shred to file a false shred claim, they will prosecute you along with it. They may not even prosecute the client because they didn't know, but they're definitely going to prosecute you. Or whoever they think was complicit in masterminding the fraud. That should be just like accounting. As long as you ask the proper questions and they misrepresent themselves, that's not your fault. As long as it's not something that's completely obvious. Kind of like third-party liability for accountants in general. As long as I ask you the right questions, if you give me the right answers and you were lying, I'm not responsible. Unless there's other things where I should have known that couldn't be correct. Okay? So they talk a little bit here, and we're going to revisit this. This is cool. So they talk about we're going to prosecute some people, and later on in the year we see, hey, they're not joking. This is really happening. They're prosecuting people. So the penalties in Section 163 start at 25% of the credits of claim, right off the bat, 25%. Then, if you're convicted, additional fines of up to 200% of the credits claimed, and imprisonment up to 2 years per offense. Okay? So we're talking criminal felony here. You can't cross the border anymore. You can't do a bunch of stuff.
How's CRA proving?
Let's revisit another case a little later on, and we'll talk about how they're going to prove that, or how I don't have to prove it, how they're going to approach that. And what situations, and then we can ask CRA at the end, what situations they would find offensive. I don't think they're out to punish someone for an honest mistake. I really don't. If we look at the facts, the people who are charged purposefully and willfully and knowingly made representations that they knew were to be false. Okay? And they did it on purpose. And we'll talk about the facts of that. And if you do that, if you knowingly and willingly lie to the CRA and make false statements to get tax credits, they're saying that's a criminal felony. You can go to jail. All right, and we talk about the more space for the project descriptions. It's actually characters, but a number of lines. Probably an old issue by now. All right. So that was about the first 4 months. Then my phone started ringing off the hook. I thought, okay, that was good. Nothing really happening now. These draft papers are out. I can coast for a little bit. And the Jentel case comes out. I'm like, whoa, Dave, did you see this? Oh my God, the SR&ED program's over. End of story. What really happened here? So I thought, okay, I better read this case. And at the start of it, you'd say, wow, I can't believe this guy lost this SR&ED claim. He sounds like the kind of client who's apparently doing some good stuff. And then I read it a little more, and I said, you know what? This guy's the typical claim who could have had a great SR&ED claim, but just didn't document their issues and activities correctly. And reading through all the facts of the situation, I said, you know, I kind of side with the CRA now. I don't think these guys really had a claim. Maybe they could have had a claim if they'd done it properly, but I think the ruling was fairly just. So in the Jentel case, what happened was the company basically had this rack of bins, plastic bins that you could pull in and out, and they wanted to develop them and make them better. So they had an activity where they redesigned the bin front and back panels, the stands, the sliders, the divider portions. Nothing really super high tech, but potentially eligible. The judge went through it and he said, well, is this SR&ED or not? CRA took the position there's no technological advancement. So as soon as you open that one, now you've got to go through the whole project. What's the technological advancement? And what I said is, I said, well, here's the facts on page 2 of your handouts of what they told the judge that they've done. And that in reality, it's just not enough. It's what they developed and what they did, but there's really no evidence of experimentation that I can see hypothesis and conclusion. On page 4 of the newsletter, and I realize this is somewhat small, I said, let's take the Jentel case and do a what-if analysis. So I'm going to just take the facts that they told the judge. I'm saying, well, you haven't really told me much. If I interpret it this way, it's in. But if I interpret it another way, it's out. And you haven't given me enough information to really skew it in your favor. So the first part is, how did you benchmark the existing technology? They don't really tell us. Like, how did you know that the solution to whatever, molding or fabricating, wasn't already readily available? If they just said, well, you know, we just had a gut feel that there was nothing out there, so we started doing it, well, you haven't defined standard practice. If they went in and said, well, I had 7 different articles on plastic molding problems and why there's certain issues here and why we can't form it, and certain experts talking about the expected technological problems, I think that would be a good project. But I'm pretty sure they were more the former, not the latter. Okay? They talk about the objectives here. Well, we got to make the bins and we got to fit it in the sliders. I don't really know if there's any experimentation at all from what they've told me. But if they talk about what I call stack-up tolerances, hey, we've got to do this and meet this kind of tip strength, certain load, price points, what you get is a series of objectives that create what I call stack-up issues or stack-up tolerances. Hey, with unlimited time and money, we know we can make this, but can we make it for $100 a unit instead of $150? Can we do various things and still meet the performance criteria? Well, maybe it's in. So I'm saying if their objectives consider different configurations, maybe for structural integrity or designs or industrial designs and related materials, well, that would be more indicative of a project that would be in. If they look at plastic melting conditions and the process conditions and how to achieve the objectives, if they consider things like, what if we put additives or reagents in our mix before we mold the stuff? Now we're starting into the experimental area. But there's no evidence that they did any of this. So again, I tell people, look, the judge had to decide on the facts that were provided. At first, it looks like these guys had engineers and they did different iterations, but in reality, they didn't really tell us what they've done. As far as the uncertainty, they didn't really tell us. Did they look at different formulations? Did they experiment in any way? They say they tested alternatives. If they would have come in and said, well, you know, we did a matrix of what we think the variables are for the plastic, and we tested different temperatures and loads and reagents and additions and mix times and melt temperatures and a combination of things where we change one factor and see the effect, and what I would call a test matrix. We have a series of variables where we understand the changes and effects of one or more variables on the upstream or downstream processes. Then we would have system uncertainty. Again, I didn't see any of this on what they submitted. So as I go more and more into the case, I'm thinking they just took basically some shelving units, changed it a little bit to look better, and put some new ones together. I don't see any experiment in a field of science or technology, as opposed to style changes or aesthetics. So the actual activities here are now where I'd focus. Here's what they told us that what we've actually done. Here's how it would not qualify, and here's how maybe that same thing would qualify. I don't know. So they're saying we tested various molding conditions. What the heck does that mean? I tested various molding conditions. I'm saying, well, if you tried 3 methods, they told us they tried 3 methods on similar parts, but maybe just, hey, this part worked, this part didn't work, this part worked. So there's what they call trial and error investigation. We try 3 different parts, we pick the one that works, and we go on. Okay? That's what I call results. The conclusion that follows the result is the technological advancement. Why did part 1 outperform parts 2 and 3? Was it the durometer of the part? Was it some special characteristic that I was unsure of? If so, again, that's more indicative of the experimental process. But I don't really see any hypothesis here. If I saw a thing that said, hey, we tried 180 samples, we modified back pressure, temperature mix, profile, mix time, anything like that, and concluded why any one of those was better than the other, that would be an eligible project. So again, when the judge basically has things like, I tried 8 different types of plastics. This is where I say, oh, hey, that's positive. You experiment with 8 different types of plastics. Why didn't they get that then? That seems to be experimental development. If you tried 8 different types of plastics, says number 2 is the best, let's go with that. That's just a result. You don't understand why. You have no technological advancement. You don't understand why the HDPE plastic outperforms polyethylene or any of the others. What you need here is the conclusion. So why do I think, you don't have to be right, why do I think or even hypothesize that this particular material is outperforming the others in a manner that I didn't appreciate at the outset? And then they talk about tested 2 plastics, thickness versus strength. But again, not enough details. So I'm saying, was it just a result? Hey, this plastic's better? Or was there actually experimental development? So you tested the thickness versus the strengths versus the effect on part design, cooling time, humidity, extrusion temperatures to mold it, either the forming process or the deployment process, or how to cut it. I mean, anything like that that's experimental could be in. And again, when I read what they've told us, I'm saying it's a little bit alarming. 8 different plastic materials, experimentation, but I'm going to guess the claimant didn't keep good records. They didn't really keep a test matrix. I'm guessing because we don't know. They didn't supply it. And they really didn't evaluate why something worked to provide a conclusion. And I would propose the conclusion is the technological advancement. A result without a conclusion is just that. You almost made it to the finish line, but you didn't quite make it there. You almost had a SR&ED project. But until you have a conclusion, why did this result happen? Not the result happened. I'll have to leave it to someone else to figure that out. I'm going to try to figure out why that result happened. Then you'd have the technological advancement. And the more I read the Jentel case, the less I think the client prepared any real evidence of experimentation. So I didn't feel too bad about reading it.
Now, the evidence before me, is that evidence from the original point or evidence gathered during the review?
The left-hand column is what they provided to the judge in court as evidence that they think they did experimental development, that they tried 8 alternative plastics. And to me, that's a positive indicator. But I'm saying it's not proof. It's really just that. It needs more detail, and that's where they didn't provide it. So it's alarming at first, but if you really dig into the question, I think you feel, yeah, client could have taken a little further.
The web would just like you to try it, if you can, to repeat back the question.
Sorry.
Okay?
Yep. All right. Yes.
This may be what they put in their T661, but when CRA came out to do the interview or the review, they may well have had all that other stuff.
I'm talking what they submitted at the tax court of Canada level, right? Like, I'm reading that. This is a case from the tax court. If they didn't provide it at the tax court,
So this stuff didn't
it's too late.
anywhere, even at the company.
They couldn't provide it at the tax court of Canada level, so it's lost. Reality, they didn't do it. I mean, you and I know that. Okay.
My recollection of this is that the judge said something to the effect that you tried injection molding technology to do this. Injection molding technology has been around for a long time, therefore it's standard practice. And that's what scares people.
That scared a lot of people, and the judge did make some comments on that. You know what? Let me revisit that issue when I talk about the Globe and Mail articles in the next one, because I have some issues with I have numerous issues with that whole concept. Yes.
You made a statement that if they couldn't produce the evidence, then they probably didn't really do the work. I'm not sure if I would agree with that, because I've talked to a lot of new clients who will explain their work in this way, but then if I start asking them the right questions, I get enough information that I can figure out what is the technological advancement in terms that they understand. I'm not just putting words in their mouth.
I completely agree. That's kind of what I was saying in my. If you said this.
The eligible work here, they just didn't have someone preparing it in a way that the CRA couldn't, or the tax court. They didn't express the technological advancement.
I think that's kind of what I'm saying here. If you would have said this, you're out. If you would have said something like this, then you could be back in. So that's really the implication I'd say. Be careful to not just rely on the fact that you looked at 8 alternatives, I'm guaranteed to be in. No, that's a great indicator, and it's unnerving that someone didn't get it, but it's not, just because you looked at 8 alternatives is not proof that you did SR&ED. There's still a little more to it.
I thought CRA stated if you haven't described your project adequately, that if they suspect that you're doing SR&ED, they will seek more information.
Yeah, I guess what we're saying is by the time you get to the Tax Court of Canada level, you've gone through the CRA, 30-day, second opinion, objection. You've had 6 opportunities to provide any evidence that you have. I'm assuming you haven't provided it yet. You aren't ever going to provide that, right? If you can't provide it at the 6th review, Tax Court of Canada, this is your last chance. All right. Any other issues on Jentel before we move on? I know that we could probably spend a whole course on just that one. It's pretty exciting. Now, there's a whole series of articles. I'm just going to talk about the main one, and then a series of follow-up articles. Not all by Barry McKenna. There's some other guys writing now. But these probably got me more calls than anything else that happened in the year. I probably got 100 calls or emails for the first of these letters and a whole bunch of follow-ups after that. So, on March 11th, Barry McKenna writes in the Globe and Mail that a flawed SR&ED program is costing taxpayers billions, wasting billions of dollars. And he makes various assertions, and I'm reading it, and my head is just spinning, and I'm saying, oh my God, this is the Globe and Mail. Like, you're actually supposed to have reporters who have backup and proof for what they, not just their theory or what they think off the top of their head. They should actually have some evidence or second opinions. And the stuff that he read horrified me. I mean, in any paper, never mind a real newspaper. Issue 1. He says, so this is page 5 of your handout thing. He says, this year, Ottawa and the provinces will spend $4.7 billion to more than 20,000 companies. But a third or more of that cash is being wasted and paid to consultants as a result of hazy rules on legitimate R&D and limited government auditing resources, according to dozens of interviews with consultants, claimants, and government officials. Well, I don't know. Okay, I would agree that statistically the latest results say that CRA does spend $4.8 billion a year, so that part seems somewhat factual. The rest of this kind of amazes me. So my first question is, where does he get the idea that all claim out of the $4.7 billion, a third of that's going to consultants? I wish I had a piece of that, but I don't think so. There was a study done, and there's another one being conducted right now. I forget the group, but it's actually supposed to be published in the fall about, again, compliance costs. This is a study from back in the 90s that I used to refer to, that they talked to claimants about what's your cost for pulling a claim. And yeah, for claimants under $200,000 of credits, it can go up to 30% or even higher if they use consultants. But I would say the big guys who are claiming more than $10 million, they're not paying 30% to any consultant. They're not even paying 10%. They're not even paying 5%. And they're the vast majority of that $4.7 billion.
I would say that his percentage is even more outrageous when you consider that there's still many companies do it themselves. So
It's, for anyone in the room, that statement you just know off the top of your head is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way that should be published anywhere in a credible paper. I just smack my head on the table when I see it. So here's where I'm supporting my thing. I'm saying, well, the latest published stats about claimants from CRA was 2004. 20,000 claimants, roughly, in 2004. 4,000 of the big guys. Okay. The 4,000 of the 20 that are large companies collect 2/3 of the money. And the little guys that they're talking about in here, the other 16,000 guys, are 1/3 of the money. And I'm saying, these guys at the 2/3, none of those guys are paying 35% to a tech consultant to do their, I guarantee you that. I know it for a fact. I've dealt with lots of those companies. Not even a fraction. And yet McKenna publishes right here, quote, 1/3 or more of that cash is being wasted and paid to consultants as a result of hazy rules. So again, really there's people in the public, and I hear it's a lot of political issues. There's lots of studies going on. Certain governments want to maybe cut the budget here, cut the budget there, and $5 billion is a nice big number. You take a big chunk out of that. So I don't know. A lot of people are saying this is more a political agenda to get public opinion going. It doesn't matter if it's based on truth or not. We'll get people thinking in a certain way so that public opinion will shift.
I met the Minister of Finance at a reception a few years ago, and I suggested to him, yeah, the consultants are taking a lot of money, but it's only because the forms are so damn difficult to fill out. I challenged him. I said, why don't you sit down and try and fill one out properly without a consultant helping you, and then have one of your auditors look at it and see what he thinks. I don't know if we ever took up the challenge, but I don't remember the system ever getting any simpler. If it wasn't so complicated to do, you're right, it wouldn't cost money. That's why it costs money. It's impossible for the average guy to do.
This will lead into a whole bunch of other discussions about how else should we fund it. Should we use grants? Should we use... Let's leave that till we talk about that in some follow-up articles. So I see where it's leading. Good head up. So anyways, as I said here, if I look at the statistics, I can start to say I really don't agree with his numbers or any of the assertions that he's basing on that. All right. A number of other issues. Issue 1, so cost paid to consultants. When they talk about the competitive funding, these are kind of indirect funding. The cost paid to consultants as a percentage of the whole. This is going to lead a little into some of the other articles. When I talk about these papers here to give a perspective, they then talk about, Canada's wasting too much money on this compared to other countries. And that no other country is spending as much on SR&ED credits, and we should look at the United States and other models because perhaps they're more efficient with their research money. I'm like, that's crazy. Anyone who looks at any of these studies realizes we are miles ahead of the United States. And I'm going to prove that right now. So the first thing they talk about is the after-tax cost and then something called the beta index. What they say about after-tax costs is it's not really a good measure of an incentive to do research in a country. Because after-tax cost has two components. If you give me lots of credits, my after-tax cost looks good. If you have a high tax rate and I can deduct an expense, my after-tax cost looks good. Business people like high tax credits. They don't like high tax rates. Okay? So after-tax cost has a good side and a bad side. To compare country to country, what they do is they say, let's take the after-tax cost and divide it by 1 minus the tax rate. So the higher your tax rate, the worse your beta index is, and that'll factor in the high tax rates are bad, but incentives are good. So if you look at the beta index for Canada, we've basically got 0.893, which is one of the lowest for large companies, and 0.678, which is, again, one of the lowest. Arguably, they don't have Republic of Ireland for small companies on here properly, but there's 1 or 2 companies, Spain as well for small companies, that could rival the Canadian credits. And again, here you have to make certain assumptions on, I think they're just looking at the federal level and not factoring in any provinces or anything like that, which can be very substantial as well. Okay, so Canada, tax-wise, is one of the top countries to do this. This is really the chart. It might be easier to watch in your handouts. But this gives the scope to me to look at that whole article in perspective. And what it says is, the author was saying, well, Canada spends more per capita on business expenditure, on R&D. And I'm saying, no, they don't. The percentage of business expenditures of R&D financed by the government in Canada is around 4%. And it's one of the lowest of all industrialized countries. And yes, the argument is that it's done via the tax system. So we let the taxpayer decide where to do it. Whereas many other countries do grants, which is we'll decide when industries get the money. And if you're not one of those industries that we decided should benefit, you got to do it on your own. You don't get any incentives. All right? Now, then they compare us to the United States. And I'm saying, well, realistically, you're just comparing the outputs to the United States and saying, well, look, we're starting to lag even further behind. United States spends 12% of BIRD. And we do 4%. And we're actually, when you look at the results, we're actually competitive. We're getting as much bang for the buck in our industry, statistically, by investing 4% government-wise, as the United States does, investing 12%. But the United States has a much bigger mix of direct grants. They just give the money directly to the company. You don't have to file any tax credits or anything like that. And it's very lucrative. So I'm saying that this table kind of shows me, when you look at other tables, that the indirect incentives, the tax credits, tend to actually outperform. And if you look at the results of companies, we'll forget about Spain and Portugal right there, but the results of companies and countries that use that, the tax credit seems to be outperforming the grants as far as productivity. Okay? And furthermore, Canada doesn't invest nearly as much as the United States, which is what he's benchmarking us against to say that we're falling behind. Yes, Bernie?
The other thing, of course, is that the states, including their grants, is from the military.
Well, a lot of it's defense contracting, so you're right. We can't really get into that. But it skews the whole thing. So I'm saying, listen, if you want to say we're lagging behind the states, you have to compare apples and apples. You got an economy that's 9 to 10 times our size, and that percentage, like even per capita, invest triple what we do on the same size. So 30 times really what we do. And saying, hey, we're lagging behind a bit. Well, I hope we would be, right? And the reality is we're barely lagging at all. We're really keeping pace. So I'm saying, it seems to me that they should be saying the tax credits seem to be working a lot better than all the other incentives, because the U.S. is spending 3 times as much for basically the same output and performance. Okay. Anything else on that one? The article then goes on, and what they do is they took a little bit of facts, and then they skewed it. They said, look, there's over 15 studies over the day that talks about the tax payback for every dollar of tax forgone as far as value to the economy, right? New tax revenues come in. So they call it the elasticity of R&D. So they say for every dollar that we put in, we get $1 to $1.50 back in tax revenue over the next 5 to 10 years. Or only 35% back, or 75%. So there's different studies that say ultimately it's around a 1-to-1 payback. For every dollar of SR&ED tax credits that we give to a client or company, over the next 10 years, they're going to create new revenues from that, which are going to create new taxes, so we'll eventually break even. And what Barry McKenna says, which is truthful, is that 15 studies show that there's negligible, if anything, or just break-even return on this. Okay? But this is just the tax revenue. This is the tip of the iceberg. If you read all of these studies, what they say is this is just the tax return. But the real benefit, so in 2006, the OECD does a study here and says this is the basic dollar of tax you get for dollar of tax you put in. But the real societal benefit, they say, has to factor in what they call a social rate of return. How much new work do you create, and new jobs, and new infrastructure, and things like that. And they can't agree on it, but they estimate it somewhere between 5 to 7 times. So if it's 1-to-1 here, on direct tax back, the return is really 500 to 700%. For every tax dollar that goes in, the ultimate economic return for the country is 500 to 700%. And that part wasn't mentioned in the article. It just talked about, on a lot of these we're not even breaking even, or we're just barely breaking even. I'm saying if you take a little fact like that out of context, it sounds pretty bad. But when you look at the big picture, I'm saying, wow, that's very misleading to say that in a newspaper and make people who aren't aware of this believe what you're saying.
It actually, I mean, it's a bit ridiculous to say this, but it's almost like a game of internet. It didn't cost you anything. You put $1 in, you got it back.
They can, right, this is objective, that's the tax revenue. It breaks down when different economists talk about social rates of return. And it can be anywhere from 4 times to 8 times. It really depends on your assumptions. Most will agree, economists worldwide, it's at least 4 to 5 times. Others would argue it's 8 to 9 times. The consensus seems to be 5 to 7 times payback for every dollar in on the ultimate social return.
Dave, it sounds like you've got to write an informed rebuttal.
Well, ultimately, when I have the time, I'll probably write a letter to the Globe Mail and deal with all this. But in the meantime, I got to deal with all this stuff. All right. So, like I say, there's a lot of facts in here, which if you take them out of context, or you just provide one portion, like they've done, are very, very misleading, in my opinion. And then the article goes on. It says, the program is completely mismanaged by the CRA. Money is often paid to decidedly low-tech and routine manufacturing, such as baking gluten-free cake, making injection-molded auto parts, or growing potted roses. I'm like, well, hey, okay. I've had clients who claimed all of those. So you're saying they're not scientists? Someone who makes injection-molded auto parts, they don't know anything about science or technology? There's no science involved in that? Auto parts can't be improved. We've already hit the ultimate limit of an auto part. If I was in the bit, I'd be insulted that he's saying making auto parts is not science or involving science. Well, he's basically saying some industries shouldn't qualify. Like, why should auto parts get it? Baking gluten-free cake. He's saying that doesn't involve any science. I don't know if any of you have been involved in the food industry. There's whole application papers that give examples of exactly the science, what the questions are, what a hypothesis would be, why these would qualify. I mean, I'm looking at it, and they're all valid science. Why wouldn't they qualify? Because some newspaper reporter doesn't see it, doesn't understand anything about auto parts, that they could say the whole auto parts industry shouldn't claim SR&ED, or it's low tech. I don't know. I believe everyone has their own opinion, but if you start writing this in the Globe and Mail, in a national magazine, I think you should be able to support that or back it up with facts. So again, I find this all offensive. Then he talks about, well, here's other companies that are clearly doing SR&ED, and they're not getting the money. And I'm reading it. I'm saying, where's this guy getting off? He says, Toronto-based iSkin, page 9 here, developed antimicrobial covers and wireless accessories for iPads and iPhones. Whoopee-doo. Ran into CRA's Get Tough policy. Company applied for $1.8 million in credits, was rejected after an audit on the grounds that it worked around to do routine engineering. Well, okay, I haven't heard any facts about what they did, but you're saying, oh, because I make an antimicrobial cover for my phone, auto parts couldn't be SR&ED, but an antimicrobial cover for an iPhone, clearly that's SR&ED. I don't know, I'm reading this and I'm saying, what's this guy talking about? The act is vague to begin with and interpretive, complained Ron Giuliani, iSkin's Director of Business Affairs. Well, this pretty much tells me right here, who would be the best to talk about the SR&ED? The Director of Business Affairs or the scientist who did all the work? These guys are in a newspaper and they got their business director talking about CRA's not fair. Why aren't they fair? It sounds totally fair to me. In fact, if you get your business director, which is probably the guy in the SR&ED review, he probably acted like that too and showed he has no knowledge of science. If he was saying, hey, we dealt with variables on this, that, or the other thing, numerous experimentations on how to control contagion and new techniques, I'd be siding with, hey, that should be in. But just because you say I made something protective for an iPhone, I must be SR&ED, I don't know how we can draw that corollary and at the same time say, well, auto parts couldn't be SR&ED. Okay, like I say, I read these articles and I just want to shake my head. Luckily, I don't subscribe to this paper, but nonetheless, these are mainstream articles that are shifting the public opinion and could direly affect the SR&ED program, in my view, if the truth doesn't come out. If too many people start believing this, that this is actually factual, any of the stuff in here, I think it could really hurt the program.
What was CRA's reaction to some of those actions?
Pardon?
What was CRA's reaction to some of those actions?
We'll have to ask CRA at the end if they want, But CRA can't be recorded on anything. So right now we're going live because we're webcasting.
Okay.
We can ask all those questions at the end once we turn the video off and get the CRA official response. Or semi-official. Okay, issue 4. So he was just slamming everyone. So then he starts slamming the CRA. He says, CRA risk controls aren't working. The result is that the CRA is a rubber stamping large volumes of smaller claims that look legitimate because more thorough reviews are too costly and too time-consuming. This is a valid issue. I think we'll come back and address this and why they've talked about criminal charges, felonies, for exactly what we're talking about. So I'm saying, okay, that's a legitimate problem, but it's being dealt with. And it's a new problem, and I think they've squashed it really quickly if you look at what they're doing. Meanwhile, many larger claims are being arbitrarily scaled back or rejected. And again, I would say it's more like the Jentel case, in my opinion. I get people coming to me with objections and stuff all the time. And in most cases, I agree with the CRA. In some cases, it's salvageable, but I see why the client had a problem. They certainly weren't providing the relevant information to the CRA in a manner that would allow them to give them money. And when you direct them, hey, don't talk about this, go provide these other things, and they do, again, CRA is generally very open to looking at that. So, I mean, I have some issues on my personal experience with what he's saying, that CRA risk controls aren't working. I haven't seen too many claims that just fall through the cracks or whatever. Once in a while, I see a claim where I say, I'm not sure, it's a gray area, let's see what happens. Those ones usually get flagged for review. Somehow, the ones I have problems with, I don't know how the CRA does it with their risk criteria, but they seem to have all the same problems for all the same reasons. So I think the CRA, my experience is CRA risk controls tend to work very well. And I'm not saying God one doesn't fall through the cracks, but not to the tune of billions of dollars wasted a year as the Globe and Mail is purporting. Okay. Anyways, anyone else have any issues on risk controls, or that claims are just falling through the cracks, or the corollary that large legitimate claims are now being summarily dismissed? Okay. And the last one, and this is just actually opinion. I don't really care one way or the other. What are some of the alternatives to refundable tax credits? And the main one, still an argument. Do we do grants or do we do credits? People like grants because they can have better budget control. They can target industries. That's about it. People like tax credits because business knows it. It avoids having politicians pick which companies to do. Not like, hey, we're only going to fund plastics or whatever. Because I would say politicians are the worst people to pick which businesses. They don't know anything. Market-friendly, wider reach, lower administrative costs, and more accessible. I think if you ask most clients outside of the defense and aerospace industry if they'd rather have a grant or a tax credit, it's hands down tax credit. I can't even convince most of my clients to talk to an IRAP guy or let him through the door. Dave, we like you. Don't ever mention that again. We've tried IRAP, and you've done good work for us, so we're not going to fire you immediately for even suggesting such a thing, but we'll stick with the shred credits, and let's never talk about that grant scenario again because it wasn't a good experience for us. End of story. That's about 90% of the time. All right. So I'll talk about the Globe and Mail a little more later because it doesn't stop here. This guy starts writing some more articles down the road just to keep things going, but nothing really quite as offensive. Okay, the last one in the first half of 2011, lease expenditures. And I only brought some stuff up that I thought, hey, there's some neat things in here that maybe I wasn't talking about before or hadn't appreciated. One of them is clarifications on what a building is or isn't. And that came from a case called Do Engineering, where the client had a trailer that they bolted onto their building and used it as a lab. Sarah said, no, it's part of the building. And he said, no, it's not. It's another structure that's bolted to the building. And the judge went through what a building is or isn't and said, well, it's got no foundation and it's another structure, fully eligible, right? So now they're applying it. Well, a building has a foundation and things like that. But what's really neat is they say that there's other property attached to a building that's not necessarily a building, which means if it's used for shred, you could claim it. Concrete footings, foundation, and structure for machinery. So I got to spend $20,000 so my machine doesn't vibrate. That's not part of the building. That could be SR&ED if it's an SR&ED machine. Stairs and platforms, sole purpose of which is to access machinery. Class 8. So again, we can claim it. I would say a lot of this tends to follow accounting. If your accountant capitalizes those as part of the building, CRA is going to say that's part of the building until I'm actually reading this. Another one. Bandwidth allows as a lease of equipment under the proxy method. So I do the proxy method, which normally covers my hydro and phone and whatever, and I would have thought internet, but they say, no. Bandwidth's not overhead. That's a lease of equipment used solely for SR&ED. Wow. Hey, pretty clever. Like I said, I don't know what to say other than I wish I would have thought of that. Okay. So really I'm just saying, as a practitioner, that brought up some issues or ideas that I hadn't thought of, so I thought it was kind of neat. Anything else on that? Or leases in general? Okay. The next one. The next two cases, again, aren't really that earth-shattering. The first one's a company called Soniel. It was actually an appeal to a prior judgment. And really, the evidence really sums it all up. And it reminds me of a case called RAS Christie from a long time ago. And RAS Christie, I'll talk about that and I'll talk about this one. RAS Christie was the classic case. And what it hits home is you can't get an SR&ED credit just for having a great idea. You have to base it on the expenses you incurred to do the experimental development. In RAS Christie, what happened was we had these guys develop a new concrete forming method. And they said it took a whole man-year. And when the CRA said, well, show us your evidence of experiments, they had 38 pages, 1 page of ideas, and it looked like one test that went right to the final answer. And the reviewer said, come on, this is 8 to 10 hours work. There's no way this spent a year. And it's clear to me what happened in RAS Christie is the guys thought of it and said, yeah, well, we're so brilliant. It took us a year, but it would take a normal person, a mortal, not of our stature, a whole year to do this, so we should get to claim for a whole year, even though we did it in 8 hours. And it doesn't work that way. And this is pretty much the same thing. The sole evidence provided with respect to the power optimization project was a single plan containing 11 pages in point form. 2 simple diagrams, and it looked like they went right to the final answer. So again, it's just they didn't keep evidence of experiment. They may have thought of something very neat or new or novel or even patentable, but they didn't do experimental development. I think that you see cases like this over and over, and they just hit home. Having a great idea is good, and it can make you a lot of money, but it doesn't qualify it as SR&ED. Okay? If you can get the answer right off the bat, you have a very short project. Global Enviro. Okay, so remember we said, oh, in the first letter they're talking, CRA's threatening, we're going to charge you guys. Hey, well, Global Enviro was actually a case where they charged the guy back a few years ago, and he appealed. He said, oh, come on. You guys charged me ridiculous, 77% penalty. Okay, I filed a fraudulent claim. You charged my company $250,000 fine and me a $250,000 fine. And, hey, can't you lower it a bit? And really, the judge said, you got lucky. The fine under the Act could have been up to 200%. Okay? And we only hit you with 77%. So he's not reducing it. And the facts of that case are interesting, that the company originally filed the claim and the SR&ED work was all eligible. What happened was, the then reviewer informed the claimant, hey, it's all eligible, but a lot of this work is in this year, and some of it seems to be in a prior year, which is beyond your 18-month deadline. So the taxpayer said, oh, come back in a week. And then they fraudulently reproduced documents to pretend or make it look like the expenses of the prior year were incurred in the year that was still on site. Sadly for them, they had previously provided information that conflicted with that, which raised the alarm bells, and on further examination, it found out that they'd committed fraud. The owner's charged criminally. The president of the company, he can't cross the border anymore. He's got a criminal felony. Him and his company got fined $250,000 on $550,000 of credits. And they had to repay the credits on top of it. So I would say there's a good deterrent. You know, people looking out there thinking of filing fraudulent claims or advising clients, hey, just bend the truth a bit here and there, I would expect them to be charged criminally. And that should clean up a lot of the problems that CRA is talking about with the current program. Okay, so June and July, this guy McKenna, he hasn't done enough damage back in March. He's got to come back and pipe up a little more. So he's saying, well, look, Canada's sliding in the innovation rankings. We're barely keeping pace with the United States. I'm like, yeah, dummy, they spend 3 times per capita what we do. We're doing great. We're doing triple what they do. We're doing equal what they do on 1/3 of the money. We should be commended for that, not that we're slipping in the rankings. And another one, I'll talk about the specifics or the issues that I like or don't like in these articles. So, the first article talks about whether we should shift from credits to grants. And he says that ultimately, we can't support all industries. We're just too small an economy. We have to do what other small economies do and just pick the winners. We're going to go with forestry and auto, and that's it. You're not in one of those, you're in software, and we don't support. Tough. Don't do software in Canada. And we'll pick which of these 3 or 4 industries Canada's going to excel in, and everyone else can just get lost. You're on your own. Move to another country if you want to do research. Okay, well, whatever. So that's his personal opinion. I disagree. I'll talk about that in a bit. He says, well, again, we've decreased in performance from 2008 to 2010. And I'm saying, well, we actually kept pace with the U.S. They had a harder recession, but everyone decreased there because there was a pretty big recession. So, yeah, spending didn't go up. But I'm saying, open your eyes, buddy. If you read the paper, in the last 2 years, there was a big recession. Everyone's cutting back on R&D. Of course, it didn't go up to normal levels pre-recession. He's saying we should provide more funds for venture capital and commercialization. So this is one I actually agree with. He's saying too many of the guys get the shred projects. It's good. We've developed a better product, but we don't know how to bring it to market. We've got a better product. We've built a proverbial better mousetrap, but we don't know how to market it. We don't know how to distribute it. We don't know how to export it. Whatever the case. Kind of like IRAP would do. If we approve you on an IRAP project, well, we'll give you money for marketing that IRAP project for a certain amount down the line. I actually think that's a good idea. I have nothing against it. I'm just hoping they don't take the money of the shred pool to go finance that. That's my only concern. And really, he purports that the politicians should pick the winners, and our politicians should decide what industries Canada is going to put forward and then which industries intend to die. So we're going to basically move to, I would call that a socialist economy, where our government decides what we're going to do and how we're going to work. And the free market doesn't really matter what people want, and businesses surviving on their own. So I would say this seems, I can't believe that this guy's a little bit right-wing to begin with, and yet he's proposing the most socialist concept I've ever seen here, saying never mind the free market and what the free market does. Let's control the market and provide subsidies so that we can mess with supply and demand. Again, me, I'm more of a free market kind of guy. Let the market decide. Give fair incentives to everyone, and the winners will basically rise to the top. Any other issues on Globe and Mail? All right. Okay, this next one, draft policy on the eligibility of works. So there was about 5 or 6 draft policies released all this time, and deadline for comments passed. 5 of them were financial, and 1 dealt with technological eligibility. I didn't really have any issues with the financial ones. They seemed to be consistent with everything in the ITs and ICs before. But I read the one on technological eligibility, and I had some real concerns. And not just me. I mean, if you look, there's submissions to the CRA. I've posted my submissions. But they're focusing on a lot of stuff that really isn't relevant in my opinion. What I'll do is I'll see how our time goes, and I've reproduced the actual document. So if we have time, maybe we'll go through it and talk about it really quickly. But some of the concerns are, one, the big push is, what is a hypothesis? So they're all the way there. You've got to show a hypothesis. Of course, a hypothesis. That's a good idea. I think that most people don't understand what a hypothesis is, and that maybe we should define that. Another big thing that we find in there is they talk about the scientific method. You got to use the scientific method. I said, okay, well, that's the first time I've heard them talking about something that's worldwide accepted. So I went to Wikipedia, and I went to Webster's. I said, what's the definition of the scientific method? You know what? It's your project objective, hypothesis, design, test, modify, cycle, conclusion at the end. Not conclusion, project name, whatever, the way the CRA is saying. Tells your advancement first, and then tell us all the research that you did to do it. Okay? I'm saying that's a really good idea. Most people intuitively, since grade 6 up, if they've been in an industrialized country, heard of this scientific method, project, hypothesis, project objective, hypothesis, design, test, modify, and conclude. So, why don't, my idea is, if you're going to say the client has to follow the scientific method, why don't we define what that is? They say you have to follow the scientific method. Period. It's not in the glossary. What is a scientific method? Anyways, I'm saying, I like it. And if we follow the scientific method, I think that would be intuitive to everyone because you won't put the conclusion up front. That would be intuitive to the CRA then. I wish they would take their own advice on that. So again, scientific method in my view is a good thing, but you should define what it is. Because I'm telling you, I went to Oxford and I have a definition that's the traditional one, but then I went to Wikipedia and there's 4 other definitions. There's the modern definition, there's the technical, there's the software definition. I don't know. So when CRA says I have to follow the scientific method, what definition of scientific method are they referring to would be my next question. It's just a draft document, but I think it's a positive indicator. They should just think it through all the way. Let's go with this. But if you say we have to follow it, you should define it. If you say you must follow this, I need a definition of what I'm supposed to follow. Or I get to pick my definition. I'm saying there's numerous definitions of it. Without the definition, the law would say I get to pick up my own definition. And if it meets my needs, well, that's the one the courts are going to use because it's ambiguous otherwise. Again, we want to take the ambiguity out, streamline it, make it simple. Here's what we're looking for. We want the scientific method, including these issues. Done. That's very clear.
Same thing applies to trial and error, which CRA doesn't like. But if you look up Wikipedia and various dictionaries,
there's a lot of semantics. You want to say we did a systematic investigation versus trial and error, and you're good on the same thing. Right? Those are probably the main issues. If we have time, like I say, I'll actually blow through my policy paper and talk about some of the key things in there. I think we're almost near the end, so I think we'll have time for that. Reviews to watch for. So these are something that realistically I don't think we have to spend too much time on. The Jenkins panel report's coming out. I don't know. It was supposed to be out in the spring, then the summer. Not supposed to be out in the fall. Realistically, I don't think we're going to see it till next year, but you never know. Taxpayers' Ombudsman report was from 2007. And I mean, the questions now almost aren't relevant anymore. A lot of them are, did any CRA official try to persuade you not to use a consultant and stuff like that? Because I think that was rampant about 4 or 5 years ago. It's not so rampant now. And even though that's going to be proven now when they put the report out, CRA is going to say, well, come on, that was 5 years ago. Things are different now, and everyone's going to agree. So I think that this report's being suppressed purposefully to the point where we can say, oh, yeah, it was bad in 2007, but this is 2011. Come on, guys. Everything's better now, or 2012. So I'll be mildly interested to see what that report says, but I don't really care at the end of the day. I can pretty much tell you what's going to be in there. One of the key things, I guess, coming back from that is the technological advancement criteria. So when we talk about that paper itself, the eligibility of work and scope, one of the things that I find is that the CRA really has a bad definition of technological advancement. CRA's definition of technological advancement is the access you have to have technological advancement. So you write a project that illustrates technological advancement by technological advancement, uncertainty, and systematic investigation by qualified personnel. I'm saying, but you just use the word to define itself. You can't say to me, show me your technological advancement by showing me your technological advancement. That's a self-fulfilling definition. The answer should be, show me your technological advancement by first describing objectives beyond standard practice, then related uncertainties and systematic investigation by qualified personnel. I'm saying if they took box 240 of the T661, and instead of saying, what technological advancement did you contemplate at the outset of the project? And then providing examples where they actually give you the conclusion as the first thing to really confuse the heck out of you. If they said, describe objectives that go beyond industry standard practice, which is really what they want, then people who fill out these forms would actually provide the information that they're looking for, instead of something that's not what they're looking for. So again, I've made that recommendation for 10 years. I'm sure no one there is going to listen to me, but it's a huge opportunity for guys like ourselves, because no client who reads that is going to put the right stuff in box 240. Until you tell them, forget what they say, tell us what your objectives are and how you define standard practice to show it wasn't readily apparent. And they're going to nail it every single time. So again, CRA is creating a huge opportunity for guys like us to basically say, don't listen to what they say, listen to what they really mean. If you read their circular, they're telling you have to benchmark standard practice and provide objectives beyond that. So again, I think the simplification and streamlining is say, this is everything you ever need to do and support. You want to tell us, how did you benchmark standard practice in a technological advancement? My view is technological advancement involves 5 components, not 3. And if any single one's missing, you could lose the entire claim. But if all 5 are there, you have a solid claim. You will win in court every single time. You don't have to submit the CRA vagaries. You can say, look, I want to go talk to the judge, end of story, and by the time you get a Crown attorney in, they're going to realize that their client has a losing situation, and they're going to settle. The weaknesses are as follows. 1, you didn't tell them what you did before you started the work. And everyone does the same thing. You do internet searches, Google searches, articles, patents, whatever. Talk to suppliers, talk to experts. Keep some notes on that, you're golden. If everybody does this, less than 50% of people keep it. I'm not joking. They do. I did 20 Google searches. I had 20. Hey, where's the articles? Oh, you wanted me to save those? Yeah, save as. How long did that take? A second. Do it. You spend an hour finding the article. How long is the save as? 3 more seconds, and we got a solid SR&ED claim. So again, put the systems in. They don't give quantifiable objectives. Well, I don't blame them. Read any of the CRA examples. They say you have to have extremely accurate measurements. The courts say you must have extremely accurate measurements and analysis of those measurements. Without such measurement analysis, systematic investigation can't exist. And you read the CRA examples, none of them have measurements and analysis. So you have to ad lib. You have to say, well, it's a good start what they got, but you can't really submit what they're showing. You have to actually do a better job. You have to rise above the bar of the examples they've given. What I would say is, if you can provide at least 3 benchmarks with measurable parameters, cost, performance, pressure, anything. Hey, we're at $100 a unit, we want to go to 98. We're at 1,000 pounds per square inch, we want to go to 1,200. I don't care. Something that can be measured, that's objective, that's verifiable, that's scientific, is really the guiding point here. And as you stack up more and more objectives, they tend to create more uncertainties. Hey, I know with unlimited time and money I can make this table out of plastic, but you're saying $100 a unit. Holy smokes, now I got to start experimenting with different materials, different methods, things to make it work. So again, it's not often one single objective, but when you put all of them in combination, the stack-ups of the objectives create what I call stack-up tolerances or issues that then create the uncertainties. My other big push is saying, what the heck is technological uncertainty? Technological uncertainty to me is very clear. If you have an existing model for something, my flow software says if I'm going to mold this part, I should use pressure of this and temperature of that and whatever other 7x times 3y plus 4z is the formula to mold this particular part. Standard practice or the standard formula. So if I can say, well, that's what the world-class modeling software I use recommends, and yet when I go into practice it didn't work. There's something wrong. Either they're missing one or more variables, or the variables that they have aren't correct in my particular situation. The world's leading software, the models that we have do not work for me. But I'll start doing some tests, and I'll see if maybe they misrepresent the pressure, or maybe I can tweak that existing formula to make it more accurate to my situation. To me, that's clear. There's no clearer example of technological advancement than that. There's industry standard practice. There's the actual variables, the complete understanding of why does it work, and ultimately the conclusion at the end that ties to the variables. So if I write a sentence, I don't know if this is going to work, and it works, there's no technological uncertainty. If I say, I know this is going to work, but I don't know the optimal combination of temperature, pressure, glass fiber content in the mold, and the effects of viscosity on this resin that I'm using all at the same time, that sounds like variables of uncertainty. The clients who can do what I call a DOE, design of experiment model, where they say, here's the most relevant factors. And we're going to test this and see how it affects the other ones. And then this, and then this, and then this. X, Y, Z, W, whatever our components would be, always get the claim. Very few clients, when you ask them, can do this. When I say, what are the variables of uncertainty? Sorry, in certain industries, they have a problem doing it. In other industries like chemicals, they will get it every time because, oh, easy. Here's my top 8 variables of uncertainty. Here's how I'm experimenting. It's a slam dunk. That's a solid SR&ED project every time. You couldn't lose on that. All right. So uncertainty to me, what are the top variables? And a crack team may identify 60 or 70 variables, at which point you have to be even more creative and say, okay, use your professional judgment to rank those variables and what you perceive to be their order of significance. That will then lead you down here. Where the clients have lost in court, I'm saying it's because they haven't been descriptive about what they've done. They said, I looked at many, many alternatives. I always tell people, hey, I've seen a description for over $1 million written on a single piece of paper. Not even 2/3 of a piece of paper. And we did 43 different prototypes in 7 different classes. Because it was different about each class and why we had to do it. The reviewer came out. He said, oh, I used to do all the same kind of work here too when I was an engineer in industry. And did you use forms? And did you consider thermal rides? Oh, yeah, we did. Here's some pictures. He said, beautiful. 43 prototypes. I estimate each to be 600 to 800 man-hours. $1 million assessed as filed. Very easy, right? You see what he did? Number of alternatives, reasonable amount of time for alternative, yeah. What if I said, I'm really close, I did many prototypes. Anyway, what's many times 500 hours? What if I said I did many, many prototypes? Think that's going to trick them? Well, you get my point. People think, oh, I'll use language like that and I'm going to trick the CRA reviewer. They're not going to think to ask me how many prototypes I actually did because they'll be skilled in the art and say, well, I think a prototype like this is 50 hours. How many did you do? Many, many? That's going to get you a site visit. I'm saying most of this stuff is common sense. There's only really 3 ways to do experiments, I'm going to tell you. You either analyze stuff, maybe an hour per. You say, oh, out of these 20 that I analyzed, 2 look good. I go on the shop floor and I have to kick everyone off the machine and run stuff through and flush it. Well, now each of those maybe takes 20 to 100 hours. Or worse yet, I say, there's no way we can tweak our existing machinery. We've got to start all over and build a complete prototype. And then that's the 3A and B, because I usually don't build a $1 million machine and nail it on the first try. I revise it 10, 15, 20, 30 times. And then those are thousands of hours. So we've proposed that if you provide not only what you did, but the number of alternatives to show I didn't get it on the first try. I looked at 5 alternatives, or 10, or 20, or 50. Ideally, if I looked at 50 or 100, what was different about them? Why did I need that sample? Just very briefly. If that happens, the rest of everything falls in place. How did my results compare to my objectives? And most importantly, did I have a technological advance? I would propose that if you read the tax court's definition, the conclusion at the end of the day is the technological advancement. A conclusion that it can't work because, or it can work because, doesn't matter if you're successful or not, you have to be trying, or even if you're correct, you have to be attempting to explain a new understanding of those variables and how they work together that wasn't readily apparent at the start. And if you follow that process, guys like Jentel and groups like that, I don't think they would have any problems. So again, I would take that case in a bit of perspective. Okay. Well, yep. Question?
Question here from a webcast participant. A general question asks, why has the expected date for releasing the final policy documents for the policy review project been extended by a year from December 31st, 2011 to December 31st, 2012?
Sorry, that was a question to reiterate. They're asking, I think I'm going to leave that to the CRA because it's not really up to me when they're going to release that. But why is the CRA delayed releasing its notes on the eligibility paper from this year till next year? Maybe we'll turn the cameras off and we'll throw that to Don, if he's got an idea. Or, I mean, that might be a policy, an Ottawa issue as well. I don't think we'll be able to answer that, but something that we can query in the minutes and see if CRA responds formally. Cool. Any other question? Sorry, here's the Ombudsman queries. Like I say, They don't want anything that happened after February 21st, 07. So the stuff that we're talking about is stuff that happened a minimum 4 years ago. Yeah, some of it was bad. We already know that. But when the results come out, they're going to say, come on, 4 or 5 years ago, we're a lot better now. Did the CRA inform taxpayers about recent changes? Has the cost of filing increased? Did the CRA accept your request for a second opinion? Did they review and audit your claim in a professional and courteous manner? A lot of people don't think they were dealt courteously. And has anyone attempted to dissuade you from using a consultant? Because allegedly that was happening. I think I can pretty much guess what the results of those things are going to be, or roughly. But like I said, I think at the end of the day, it's not really going to matter. And maybe the timing of this, trying to poke bad stuff at the CRA in a time where I would be attacked by the Globe and Mail and other things, really isn't a good time to bring this up anyways, when the public's very confused due to numerous misrepresentations in large papers.
What the Ombudsman is supposed to be doing? I start to wonder.
Well, he's supposed to be, you mean in theory, or what's the Ombudsman really doing in practice?
I mean in practice.
That's a good question.
Because I don't know. But I've been trying to figure it out.
Okay. Since we have time, if there's no other issues, I'll go over very quickly some of my concerns on the draft policy that I submitted. And I've pretty much talked about them. One of my first issues is that about a third of this paper talks about the difference between basic research, applied research, experimental development, whether you submit it as a one-part project or a two-part project. And my question is, who cares? Like, who cares? How is this in any way relevant to claiming SR&ED? I have to follow all the same 5 criteria. Benchmark, standard practice, objective beyond it, technological uncertainty, systematic investigation, qualified personnel, conclusion. If I do that, call it whatever, basic, I don't care. Call it whatever you want. Why are we spending pages and pages if people got to read this? Who cares? I just want, everything as far as I'm concerned is experimental development. The others are all just subsets. This paper goes on for 5-6 pages about something that's completely irrelevant. It's a tick box at the start that I've never understood in 20 years that I've done it. What difference does it make? And now, they're not talking about some critical things that I think are really important, like entitlement to exploit. What does that mean? Well, that's a big issue. When I look at the new papers coming out, nobody's talking about entitlement to exploit anymore. And I always had reviewers before saying, hey, you don't have the patent on this, someone else does. Or you don't own all the rights, you can't claim SR&ED. I said, what are you talking about? Who says I need to own the rights to claim SR&ED? All I need is entitlement to exploit. All right? Entitlement to exploit, I believe I put it in the very back of your binder, or maybe not, if it got printed out. The excerpt, and this will lead back to what we have, is really that they're saying this requirement is considered to be met in cases where the taxpayer has a right to use the patent that results from the SR&ED, even if this patent is charged a royalty or similar charges. Saying, where does it say I need to own the rights? Saying it's also met if I have a preferential right to use the results. I don't have to own it. This is a very important thing because I find right across Canada, all the time, reviewers tell my clients, not my clients, other clients, and then they come to me, hey, you have to own the rights. You don't own the rights, you can't claim. I'm really worried that, this is in the IT 151, this may not be reproduced in the new papers, and if it's not reproduced, maybe that policy opinion shifting. Maybe you now need to own the rights and everything. I don't know. But I'm saying without a clear direction to the CRA that you don't, a large number of reviewers bring it upon themselves to think that they make up their own rules that you do. And again, we're just here to follow the law of our elected officials. I'll follow that, no problem, but I'm not following laws that each CRA official makes up on his or her own that they think is justifiable by themselves, because I didn't vote for them. Okay? So entitlement to exploit was something that came up, and a lot of people were saying, we're really worried, like, how is this affecting it? Has the CRA's position on this changed, or is it that they just missed putting this in the current documents that they're circulating? Because I can't seem to find it anywhere. Okay, so we talk a little bit about basic research, applied research, all these purposes. I don't really care. Like I'm saying, how does this help anyone do an SR&ED claim? How is this in any way useful? This is just confusing me. Like, I have to read 3 pages about stuff I don't understand before I can even start to talk about anything remotely relevant to claiming an SR&ED credit. Really, they talk about all the different things. Really, all they need is the purpose of the work is to achieve a technological advancement. They should delete, in my opinion, everything that they said before. Basic apply. Who cares? If you're achieving a technological advancement, that's all that matters. And I believe they need to clarify that a technological advancement is 5 steps, not the 3, the ones that we went through. If any of those things are missing, you're probably going to have a problem. They then talk about the scientific method. They talk about this a little later. So I'm saying, oh, that's good. I really like that idea. I think that's very positive what they talked about the scientific method, but maybe they should define it. Okay? I say it's not cool to say you have to achieve technological advancement by showing content, showing technological advancement, and showing technological uncertainty. How can I show technological advancement by showing technological advancement? I don't know what technological advancement is, so how can I use it to define itself? The terminology is all wrong. Every time they use the word technological advancement here, they need to replace that with objectives beyond standard practice. Or if they really mean advancement, it's the conclusion that's made at the end of the day by analyzing uncertainties created by objectives beyond standard practice. So again, I find the terminology in here very, very, very confusing. So they talk about the scientific method. Technical content and scientific method must be demonstrated. Formulating one or more hypotheses. Hey, beautiful. I agree with all this stuff. Most clients don't really know what a hypothesis is. I'll tell you. If I say, what's your hypothesis? They'll stare at me blankly. I say, hey, what were some of the problems or variables that you're dealing with? Oh, okay. That's what you want to know. Then they'll describe that as well. I mean, hypothesis is good, in my view, if it's described. When I say scientific method, again, I said, oh, that's good. Finally, the scientific method. That's what I always equated this to. This is like the scientific method from grade 6 in school. And I downloaded it. Okay, Oxford English Dictionary's definition. But then I can go on, and I can show you that there's the classical definition, which looks very much like an SR&ED project. Question or objective. Information and resources, kind of your benchmarking, your standard practice. Hypothesis. That's really defining your variables of uncertainty. Perform experiment, collect data. That's your systematic investigation. Analyze, interpret, and draw conclusions. The conclusion is the technological advancement. Without a conclusion, there is no technological advancement. There's just results. There's the potential to make a technological advancement, but you didn't make it until you make the conclusion, in my view. All right? The other published results, well, you don't have to do that. My point is, this is a great analogy. I think people follow it. But why do you say scientific method and then not define which of them? Because if we go down again, we'll see later on, there's actually numerous definitions. And there's different scientific methods now, I didn't know this till recently, for different industries. Holy smokes, which one do I use?
You can have a result, and it could be a technological advancement, even though you don't reach a conclusion. You know something, if something didn't
I disagree.
If something didn't work, you know for future use that this wouldn't work.
That's just a result. Why didn't it work?
You might not know why.
If you don't have to be correct. You have to hypothesize. I think on my best guess it didn't work because. Now you're a scientist. I agree with CRA that if you don't ask why, you haven't finished the project. You've got a result. That adds no new knowledge other than it can't be done. The knowledge that they're looking for technological is why can't it? Why do you think it can't be done? You don't even have to be correct.
They do actually state that you have to be attempting to get a technological answer and you don't have to achieve it.
Absolutely. You have to be attempting to explain it, and you could still be wrong. You could be totally wrong, but they still want to see the attempt. Because they know eventually, if you spend enough time, you'll yourself prove yourself wrong, but that might give you other ideas. And that's what they want to see. I mean, I'm kind of summarizing things in a simplistic manner, but best analogy I can give. Okay. Again, I think a lot of this basic applied research We don't really need to tell. This is good for an academic paper if someone wants to talk about history of the SR&ED program. None of this is any relevance to a claimant. I've never talked to any claimants ever about basic. Who cares? It's just wasting their time. It's of no relevance whatsoever in any manner. Whatever. So I'm basically saying that the technological advancement section that they call that should be completely eliminated. It should be benchmarking objectives beyond standard practice. Anything else? All right. Any other issues that people have? Oh, I'm sorry. One last major issue here. Psychological research. So the Act says we have 8 types of supporting activities, engineering design, all your operations management, computer programming, testing, data collection, all the dumb ones. And then they put psychological research at the end. So, okay, well, that's good. Anyone try to do a claim like psychological advancement for a software project or something like that? What they don't tell you is that psychological research is only eligible really in the pharmaceuticals field. When you're doing the final stage of human testing, and you're doing chemical and medical testing, that industry's lobbied the government to accept that, yeah, those are all hand in hand with the medical and chemical biological testing. That should be in. But you read through the Act again, and it says the things that are disallowed are social sciences. And then you read through, and psychology is a social science. So you're saying, well, how can the Act put it in, and then it pulls it back out again? Is it in or is it out? And the reality is, and they don't say this here, it's in for certain industries and certain situations. But if you're a software claimant and you say, I want to make my program more intuitive, that's not going to fly. They're going to say, well, that's a social science. So they talk about, in some cases, psychology can be a supporting activity. I agree. Why not tell us what I just told you, the cases when and when not?
I don't know how it's applied, but in fact, experimental psychology is an eligible field. But it has to follow the scientific method.
Well, so you're beyond my scope. I've never done a claim for that, but maybe there's other situations. I mean, I kind of queried Ottawa a few times on what do you mean here, and I didn't really get a straight answer. I got several answers that I just pieced together into one answer. I'm saying for the average claimant to do that is very hard because they don't even know who to call in the first place and how to get through. And I see claims all the time where people read this on their own in software and they say, I'm making it more intuitive, and they start this whole thing and they waste a lot of time as if, don't even bother. Total waste of time. All right? And again, maybe if they provided some direction in here, they define psychology, but they don't really say when it's in or when it's out. I mean, if you didn't know what I just told you, you'd be swimming like everyone else, blindly, filing bogus claims. Not really bogus. You really thought that they were in, but you just wasted all your time and money and resources, and you're not going to get that claim through. Right? Why? Because they didn't really explain that up front in a nice, succinct manner. Okay? So that was an issue I had. And then, like I say, you can look at different definitions of scientific method. So as you go on to Wikipedia, they're saying there's new definitions. They look at characteristics, hypotheses, predictions. My question then, okay, which of the definitions of scientific method am I supposed to follow? Because the law says if something's in the Act or it's said, you just read the plain English definition, like Webster's or whatever. And it's the plain English meaning. Unless there's a definition to clarify to the contrary. So I'm saying, if you're going to throw words out like scientific method, I commend the CRA on that. I think that's a very positive step. But they should take it a step further and say, whoa, that's still ambiguous. What interpretation of scientific method of the various definitions that are similar but different are we following? Okay, and like I say, psychological research, they're saying it may be eligible in some cases and not in others, but in reality, that's still misleading. I know which cases. If I'm doing pharmaceuticals, it's in. If it's anything else, it's pretty much out, other than situations, hey, I'd be happy to learn about more, but that's more or less the understanding that I've had for it. If that's the case, they should state that. If it's different and I'm misinterpreting it, I would still like to know anyways. If someone would tell me, give me an example. When's psychological research in? When's it out? Because this is saying it's in sometimes and it's out sometimes. It's just not telling us when. All right. I think that they don't define scientific method, but they define systematic investigation or search. I'm reading it, and I'm saying, whoa, that sounds a lot like the scientific method. Maybe they can combine those two definitions and say systematic investigation or search, in our view, is applying the scientific method in the following, this version of the scientific method. Or these versions. I don't really care. Give me some direction and we'll follow it. Technology base or level. This should be moved, in my view, right up to this. The part that says advancement right now should say, what's your standard technology base and how do you have objective that goes beyond that? Because that's ultimately what they want you to tell them. What did I do to define the technology and where did it go from there? All right? And that's about all I had to say on that. All right, guys. Any other questions, issues, or concerns before we adjourn? Why don't, at this point, if we have any other questions for the CRA, we'll kill the cameras at this point. We can throw questions out to Dominic, and then we can just do a quick wrap-up.